Today I'm going to be taking a look at Pardus Linux. Pardus is a Turkish Linux distribution that is based off of Debian and offers two different desktop versions, one XFCE edition and a Deepin desktop environment edition. Today I'm going to take a look at the latest release, Pardus 17.4, their Deepin edition. Let's get started. So, Pardus 17.4. Let's take a look at the Pardus DistroWatch page here. Country of origin, of course, is Turkey. Desktops, Deepin, and XFCE are offered. Today I'm taking a look at the Deepin edition. Pardus is a jointly developed project by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey and the National Academic Network and Information Center. Pardus has been around for many years, dates way back. Pardus started life as a Gen 2 based Linux distribution, and then since around 2012, they switched bases and they moved to being a Debian based Linux distribution. The Pardus website here is not readable unless you can read Turkish, the Turkish language. I don't see any easy way to get an English translation on the web page. Of course, you could use something like Google Translate. Anyway, I pulled down the ISO for Pardus 17.4, their Deepin edition, and today I'm going to install this inside VirtualBox. So, I created a virtual machine. I gave it 15 gigs of space. I gave it 2 cores of my 6-core CPU and 4 gigs of RAM. So the first thing you do when you boot up the ISO is you get this menu asking you about language. Turkish, English. I want English, of course. We have the options in the boot menu here of Pardus Live, which just boots us directly into the live environment. Pardus Live Safe Mode. Install, I'm assuming that's your standard Debian installer, the Ncurses installer. Install with graphical user interface, so a graphical installer, and advanced options, which I'm assuming is probably like the advanced options menu in Debian, where you can do more minimal installs, maybe do different branches of Debian, like the SID branch and whatnot. I'm going to choose the install with graphical user interface option today. So if I hit enter, let's see what happens. I don't know if this is going to boot us into like a live desktop environment, like the Deepin desktop environment, and then we install it from there. No, but we do have a nice little graphical installer. It looks like the Debian installer. We need to choose language. Turkish has been chosen for us by default. That's not going to work for me, so I need to choose English somewhere in here. Is English an option? There, English. Yep. So English and then continue. All right, we need to choose our continent or region. So I need North America. Continue United States is correct. Continue American English for the key map is correct. All right, so it's detecting and mounting from CD. Loading additional components. This may take a second. I'll pause the video. And now we need to enter the host name for the system. By default, Pardus has been chosen for the host name. That's fine with me. Domain name is empty. We don't have to enter a domain, so I'm just going to leave it blank. Alright, setting up user and password. The full name for this new user. So enter your full name here. I'm just going to call myself DT for my full name. Well, DT. Alright, then we need to choose a username for DT. Username, DT, has been chosen for me by default. I'm good with that. We need to create a strong and complicated password for the DT users. Then we need to verify that strong and complicated password. Right. Hit continue. Right, time zone. I'm in the central time zone here in the US. It's configuring the clock. Now it's detecting the disk. And I'm assuming this is where we get to the partitioner. Yeah, starting up the partitioner. Alright, we have the options of guided, using the entire disk, basically giving Pardus the entire 15 gig virtual hard drive of this virtual machine. That's fine for me. If I wanted to, I could do some manual partitioning. I could choose manual here and set up the partitions myself. I'm going to choose the guided partitioning. And if it's anything like Debian, what it's going to do, it's going to create a 4 gig swap file because I have 4 gigs of RAM. It always creates a, not a swap file, a swap partition. It's going to create a 4 gig swap partition, and then it's going to give the rest of the space to the extended 4 file system. And I said I created a 15 gig VM. It looks like I created a 20 gig VM here. So, all right, we have the options of putting all files in one partition. So other than the swap partition, the big partition is just one partition. That's what I'm going to do. It makes sense in a VM. You do have the option of doing a separate home partition or doing a separate home, a separate var, and a separate temp partition. Again, in a VM, because I'm kind of limited on space, I'm just going to do one partition. Alright, and this is our partition scheme here. We can review it here. We're going to have a 17 gig main partition and extended 4 file system. And then, of course, the 4 gig swap partition. I'm going to click continue. Alright, do we want to write the changes to the disk? So this is where it's asking, hey, do you want to go ahead and format the drive and write this to the disk? Choose yes. Click continue. And it's going to format your hard drive and start installing Pardus 17.4. This is going to take a few minutes, so I'll pause the video here. Alright, and now we need to install the Grub bootloader. Do we want to install the Grub bootloader to the master boot record? Yes. Click continue. Alright, enter the device where the Grub bootloader should be installed. There's only one device here, /dev/SDA, so it's an easy choice for me. Click continue. And it should install Grub. This may take a minute or two. And that actually took more than a minute or two. That actually took something like 10 minutes after, installing the Grub bootloader. I guess it had some other stuff to also install on the system. It took long enough. I was actually worried that it froze up. Maybe it just hung on something, but it finally completed. So to complete the installation, we need to click continue and reboot the machine. That's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, and once again, this portion of the install got to this part where I'm not sure if it's hung up, it's frozen. The Grub bootloader did the same thing. It hung for what seemed like forever, 10-15 minutes, and then finally completed. I've been waiting at least 10 minutes for what should just be finishing the installation and rebooting the machine after I click continue at the very end of the installation. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just type in a terminal xkill and kill this VM, because I think this is completely frozen. I don't think it's going any further. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and detach the ISO and assume that the install completed. I hope the install completed, because at this point I've spent about an hour making this video, and it does look like the install completed though. Very good. I was pretty concerned there, because I really wanted to take a look at the installed Pardus 17.4. Although I guess I could have just taken a look at the live environment had the installer completely crapped out. Alright, so we have our username, DT. We need to type in the password for the DT user. And let's log into the Deepin desktop environment. May take a second to boot. Okay, we have the options of the effect mode or the common mode. Effect mode is going to have a lot of good graphical niceties, good blur effects and stuff like that. In a VM, that's not going to run well at all. It's going to basically spike the CPU to like 100%, and effect mode does not work really that well at all in a VM, so I'm going to choose common mode. Alright, welcome. System updated successfully. Current edition 17.4. Alright, click enter. Alright, and this is the Deepin desktop environment. I wonder if I can get the VirtualBox guest editions installed. I'm going to take a second and see if I can get the guest editions working. Alright, that took me almost an hour to get the guest editions installed. I had to, install an extra repo and then install the headers and the build essentials and all that. And I'm really hoping that the guest editions work. I do have a proper screen resolution, but I don't have any wallpaper. Why do I not have any wallpaper? If I right click and choose set wallpaper, wow, the wallpaper appears now. There's the default wallpaper, but then it goes away. Why? So even though I did get the guest editions installed, they're still not really working right. There's some bugginess to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this without the guest editions. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to reattach the ISO and take a look at the live desktop environment, in that kind of small screen resolution. You guys at least got to see me go through the installation process. The installation process, of course, was buggy. The installation froze a couple of different times. So already I'm not that impressed with Pardus. I wasn't impressed with it the first time I took a look at it on the channel a few months back. I had similar issues. I had similar issues with the installer, bugginess once I had it installed. So let's just take a quick look at the live environment though. Alright, so this is the live environment here. So your standard deepened desktop environment here. So we have the panel at the bottom. Of course, you can change the panel at the bottom. You can put it on the top, the sides, what have you. You have your full screen menu system. You're almost kind of like the GNOME menu system or the Unity menu system where you have this full screen menu launcher. And that's really nice. If you like that sort of menu, if you prefer a more traditional menu, you go up here and you click these little 2 arrows here. And now it changes that full screen menu to a more traditional menu. And if you wanted the full screen menu back, you just click that and you've changed it back to this sort of menu here. Me, I prefer the more traditional kind of menu. Also the panel, I don't mind the panel being at the bottom. That's usually where I put my panels, but I do like mode instead of fashion mode where you have space on both sides of the panel. I like efficient mode where it makes it more like a panel where it's 100% of the width. That's typically what I like to do. For size of the icons, I like small. You know, that's just the way I roll. So, location, of course, we're at the bottom. That's where I would normally put it. You could place it at the top. If you wanted to, you could place it on the left-hand side. Makes a lot of sense, too, for those. Especially if you were going to do that full screen menu. Now, you know, it's more like GNOME or Unity. So, and the super key does actuate that menu system. I'm going to go back and put this on the bottom for me. Also going to go ahead and change that menu system back. And let's go ahead and check out what is installed by default in Pardus 17.4 just very quickly. I've spent a lot of time. I've been trying to record this video nearly 3 hours now, fighting with various things, fighting some with my equipment here on my desktop. I've had some mic issues today, had some camera issues today. Some of these clips that I've recorded today I had to re-record because either the audio was complete garbage or the video camera was kind of messing up on me. And then I'm fighting with this distro today. The installer did not want to work. I spent way too long trying to get Pardus installed in VirtualBox. The installer is not good. There were a couple of points where it froze up on me. And that was not just the graphical installer that you guys get to see because I put that on camera. I went back and tried the Ncurses installer too. Same thing. It freezes at certain points in the installer. Anyway, again, I haven't been really impressed with Pardus. Anytime I've ever looked at it, it's kind of buggy. I know this is in a virtual machine, but your installer should work. You know, even in a VM, your installer should work. I can understand, like, if there's graphical problems, like the guest editions don't want to work and VirtualBox. Yeah, that doesn't bother me at all. But the installer should work. So under Internet, we have Evolution for email, Firefox ESR, extended support release. Firefox ESR is the default web browser. It's going to take a second to load. Firefox is not the quickest application in the world, neither is Chrome for that matter. Modern web browsers really have become way too bloated and slow. Firefox Quantum 60.3.0 ESR. And warning me about closing multiple tabs. Also under Internet we have Mutt. Now that is an interesting choice. Mutt is a terminal-based email client. That is very, very odd to put in a Linux distro. I use Mutt or NeoMutt. It's a fork of Mutt. It's a more up-to-date version of Mutt for my email, but it is not very easy to configure. I mean, even for nerdy people, it's not something easy to configure. I don't think it's something most people would want, terminal-based email anyway, when you have things like Thunderbird or Evolution, which they include. That's just strange that Mutt is installed by default. Music, we have, of course, Deepin has its own suite of applications, such as the Deepin music player here, which I have nothing to play, but I'm sure it's a very fine music player. Very pretty music player. Let me exit. Don't want to minimize to the tray. We have the Deepin voice recorder, of course, your standard voice recorder. If I had a mic hooked up to the VM, and wanted to record myself talking, that would be a fine application for that. Deepin Movie is their movie player. And all of these applications do take a little bit of time to load up. Again, this is a VM, but also Deepin Desktop is a kind of a heavy desktop environment. I think it's beautiful, but as far as CPU and RAM, it's one of the heaviest, if not the heaviest, desktop environments we have out there. Deepin Movie version 3.0. So we have Deepin Screen Recorder. So just like we had Deepin Voice Recorder, Deepin Screen Recorder, of course, will record your desktop. That is just an application to, like I'm recording my desktop right now, this is Deepin Screen Recorder, can do that same thing for you if you want to run the Deepin desktop environment. We have MPV for our media player. Under graphics, we have our Deepin Screenshot utility for taking screenshots. Deepin Image Viewer. Deepin Picker, which is a color picking application. I can't run. You keep seeing these error messages come up when I try to run certain Deepin applications. That's because I cannot run these applications without also being in the window effect mode with the flashy effect mode. Again, I am in common mode here because the effects mode does not work really that well in a VM. It spikes the CPU way up. But the color picker tool is a standard color picker tool. Nothing really to see there. LibreOffice Draw is also under graphics. Under Office, we have pretty much the full LibreOffice suite. Base, Calc, Impress, Math, and Writer, and that is going to be LibreOffice 6. We have a document viewer. Then under the system category, we have the Deepin File Manager. Pretty nice file manager, very attractive file manager, very intuitive. Version 1.6.2. If I can close that, you got your file system bookmarks here. System disk, 17 gig volume. Of course, that is my virtual hard drive in this VM that we're connected to. And also under the system category, we have our Deepin terminal. While we're here, let's do a quick uname -r. And of course, the kernel version is 4.9. That's the standard kernel that is in Debian 9, Debian stable. Jessie, excuse me, not Jessie, Debian stretch. Jessie was Debian 8. That's the old stable of Debian. So kernel 4.9. I wonder if they have htop installed. Probably not. No, do we have top? Of course. Top should be everywhere. Let me quit that. How about a sudo apt install htop, since the htop just takes a second to install. Of course, I say it takes a second to install. I don't know what kind of speed we're going to have as far as the repos. Again, this distribution, it's a smaller distro. Country of origin is Turkey. That took a little longer to install htop. Usually htop just installs almost instantly. CPU and RAM, CPU usage right now with me doing really nothing is pretty normal. 1%, 2%. Yeah. RAM, a little on the heavy side, but not too bad. 809 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM. That's actually pretty good. Pretty good. That's no different than what I would expect with something like Mate or Cinnamon. Cinnamon might be a little heavier than that sometimes. But again, I'm not doing anything right now. There's nothing really running in the sys tray. I haven't opened that many programs. Also under system, we have the Deepin System Monitor, their own graphical system monitor. And when we open that up, we're going to get some different readings. CPU is quite a bit higher than what it was reading in htop. That might be the system monitor itself, the graphical one, taking up all that CPU. Memory is a little higher. Now we're pushing a gig. Again, the graphical system monitor itself might be the problem there. Of course, as always, I like to play around with some of the themings, and you guys know I love the wallpapers, so let's right-click on the desktop and choose Set Wallpaper, and you have some really nice wallpapers here. There's a nice cat photo if you like cats. That's an interesting photo there. And that's not bad. Yeah, nice nature photos here. Looks like mostly nature photographs. No abstract art of any kind, but a lot of these photos are really not bad. Yeah, let me go with something like that. And I wonder if I go to corner settings here. Of course, this is the hot corners. They don't work that well in a VM, but you could set hot corners to where when you go to like the top left, some sort of action happens, like the full screen menu, that full screen launcher menu opens and whatnot. So anyway, that's all I'm going to do with Pardus 17.4 today. I know this is not a very in-depth look at Pardus at all, but my goodness, I spent like 3 hours just to get to this point today. It took me, I really fought this distro, getting it to work in a VM. The installation did not want to complete. When I finally got the installation complete, then I spent way too long trying to get the VirtualBox guest editions installed, because this is based on Debian 9, Debian Stable. You know, that's kind of a chore to get the VirtualBox guest editions installed in you know, something that's based on Debian Stable, because really you have to add, you know, like the SID repos and then install the VirtualBox guest editions, the VirtualBox-guest-DKMS package, and, you know, of course you got to install the build essentials. All the dependencies also are not there. You got to install the build essentials and the module assistant and a couple other things. It was a lengthy process, but once I got the VirtualBox guest editions installed, then they didn't even work. You know, still, at least not in the deepened desktop environment. If this had been the XFCE version, it might have worked just fine. Overall, though, I've got to be honest, I am not really that impressed with Pardus 17.4, their Deepen edition. I wasn't impressed with Pardus the last time I looked at it. The problems I had today fighting this distro, the exact same problems I had 7-8 months back the last time I looked at one of the Pardus releases. I'm not exactly sure why anybody would run this. I get that it's a Turkish distro, so I guess if your country of origin is Turkey, you're Turkish, maybe you want to run a distro that has good support for the Turkish language, you know, but honestly, if you want something Debian or Debian based, there's a million choices out there, much better than what I'm saying with Pardus. So I would not recommend this distro, if I'm being honest, and I don't like being negative toward, you know, a lot of these distros that I review. I realize that people work on these things. They put their heart and soul and, you know, and contribute a lot of time and effort and money to projects like Pardus. But to be honest, it's not blowing my skirt up. So before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, Chris, David, Leor, Rob, and Tony, and also brought to you by all those fine ladies and gentlemen. You see all their names on the screen. They are the supporters of this channel. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel. You will find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.